guys. Thanks for just highlighting that. Again, that's something that our church believes in. We've always wanted to be a church that had a heart for adoption, a heart for foster care. And that means some of us stepping up in some big ways. And so, yeah, like they mentioned, if you have a heart for that, if that interested you, I'd love for you to just maybe attend that meeting right after church in the Resource Center and just find out more information. You're not going to be signing up for anything right out of the gate, but I think that is a way that some of us that are pretty blessed can just share some of the things that God has given us and kind of pass those on to families in need. So I want to transition here and ask you a question. Have you ever evaluated yourself as a driver? I had a chance to teach my oldest son to drive over the last year, and as I had a chance to do that, it made me start looking at my own driving. It made me conscious of the things that I was saying and realizing that he was watching the way I drive, and it made me realize all the corners that we cut when we drive. An example might be this. There's a lot of roads around here in the suburbs. We're supposed to do 25 or 35, and often we do 42, right? Because we know that the speed limit should actually be 45 on that road, so we're just driving the way that things should be done. That's one way. Another one is stop signs. Oftentimes we come to neighborhoods and we look in every direction and we're like, there's nobody really around, and so we learn to roll stop signs, right? Some of you don't want to make eye contact with me now because you haven't come to a complete stop in like a decade, and so we roll through stop signs, and those things are more of a suggestion, right? They're not really a law. Some of us, there's a school zone out here right in front of our church, and every day I'm on my way to work. I get here and I'm like, 20 miles an hour? I can't do 20 miles an hour. How about 30 miles an hour, right? We always justify that and think like, well, my car idles at like 25. It's almost humanly impossible to do 20, and so we just kind of do the speed that we think is right and figure that out. And there's other ones. We never follow the laws when it comes to buses, right? We're always trying to figure out like, okay, if it's a divided, is it 4-lane highway? If there's a median, when do I stop if I'm going the other direction? And so we just kind of figure out and do what we want and live how we want to. And we justify these things because we're like, well, I have places to be, or these laws are kind of holding me back. And I think it's an interesting case study because we think that these laws are great for other people, right? You know, people that roll through stop signs and people that speed and people that don't slow down in school zones, but we don't really appreciate these laws for us. They're created for people that can't follow laws, but they're not really our problem. It's something that they should have to worry about. Those people need laws. We don't need that because we're good citizens and we can trust ourselves. But when it comes to laws, when it comes to driving laws and all these things, I love to think of this concept. Without that structure, would we be able to get to Kroger, or would we probably get in an accident every time? Without that structure, would we be able to travel to work? And without some of those laws and some of that structure, would we be able to function in our day-to-day life? Well, in case you are wondering if this is me building a case against the Ohio Department of Transportation or about to go on a tirade, that's not the point of this morning. We're not here to talk about laws, rules, or structure. We're not here to talk about speed limits or any of those things, but I do want to talk about this concept that laws and rules often keep us alive and keep us safe. And so this morning, we want to have a conversation about boundaries, and not just any boundaries, not just any rules, maybe the most famous rules of all time, the 10 Commandments. I think I should have said it like this: the 10 Commandments. It would have sounded a lot cooler. We don't want to change the way that anyone views those this morning, but I want to just step back and maybe talk about how we view boundaries and laws and limits overall. And to give you an idea of where we want to go this morning, I want to share this Kevin DeYoung quote, who greatly shaped this morning's message. He says this: rules are not prison bars, but more like traffic laws that allow free people to stay free. We've been in a series in the book of Exodus the last couple weeks. The book of Exodus is the second book of the Bible and kind of continues this narrative of the story of God's people. And the book of Exodus focuses on the Israelites' liberation from slavery under the leadership of a man named Moses. And we've been talking about how the book of Exodus is God's greatest rescuing work in the Old Testament and really parallels the rescuing work of Jesus in the New Testament on the cross. And so this morning, we want to specifically look at these famous rules, these 10 commandments, these boundaries. And so if you've got a Bible, you can turn to Exodus chapter 20. We're going to be on page 47. If you don't have a Bible, there's probably one on your chair, under your chair there around you. But before we go to Exodus chapter 20, I want to give you some of the background leading up to some of these chapters that we're skipping over today. Last week, we looked at the parting of the Red Sea and learned that God uses dead-end moments for our ultimate good. We saw that God saved the Israelites from the Egyptian army as they pursued them. He demonstrated his power and faithfulness. I heard of one movement group this week that watched The Prince of Egypt, the animated classic, because they thought that I told them to do that in my message. I think you can get in trouble if your group does that, but I don't want to talk about it today. So that's the backdrop. Exodus chapter 14, God saves the Israelites, parts the Red Sea, they walk through it. In Exodus chapter 15, we see this incredible moment. Moses, basically, most of the chapter is a worship song of him just saying, "Thank you, God. I was pretty nervous there. This was a dead-end moment. I see what you just did, and we are grateful to serve you." And so we've got this incredible mountaintop moment. The Israelites come out of slavery. God parts the Red Sea. They walk through it. Moses is singing a worship song, and the rest of the book is just perfect, and everyone's like, "Yay, God," right? Not quite. This is the first couple verses of Exodus chapter 16. It says this, and you can feel the transition here. It says, "The whole community of Israel complained about Moses and Aaron. 'If only the Lord had killed us back in Egypt,' they moaned. 'There we sat around pots filled with meat and ate all the bread we wanted. But now you've brought us into the wilderness to starve us all to death.'" Okay, thank you, Israelites, right? And so you can see that even as God has done some incredible things, even as he has delivered them, they're having a hard time remembering what he's done or trusting him. And so in the following passages, chapter, we see that God meets them in the desert. He realizes they don't have food, and he begins to deliver manna and quail to them and provide meals for them every day as they trust him and as they follow him. And I'm sure after that, they were like, "Okay, God, we messed up. We forgot what you did, who you are, how you've saved us, how you've rescued us, how you provided. But then when we forgot, you brought us food in the desert. And so now we're going to remember this wrong." Exodus 17 recounts that they're journeying through the desert again, and they're like, "God, we don't have any water. Why have you forgotten us?" And so God shows up again, just like he had multiple other times, and he gives them water. He provides for them. And time again, Exodus 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, we see this pattern of the Israelites, of God's people. And here's what I want you to know, that God's children have a hard time remembering who he is and what he's done. And God's children have a hard time trusting him, obeying him, and following him. There are times in the story of Exodus, times in these chapters where the Israelites would say, "God, we hear what you're saying, we see what you're saying, and we want to follow you, we want to trust you." And then they would turn around and do the exact opposite. And so we see this up and down pattern from the Israelites. And I think what I want us to see out of this pattern today is, if we're honest with ourselves, it's probably the same pattern that we have as God's children, right? There are moments that we see who God is and we appreciate what God has done. There are moments that we remember the things he's done for us, the ways he's rescued us, the way that he's delivered us. And yet there are other moments where we're like, "Nah, I don't remember that. God, why have you abandoned me? Why have you forsaken me? Why have you forgotten about me? Why don't you save me? Why am I in this dead-end moment?" And so again, God shows up in Exodus chapter 19 to remind his children that he's faithful, to remind his children that he provides, to remind his children that he's the one that delivered them from Egypt. And so he brings them to the base of this mountain. And Moses, their leader, ascends this mountain, and he's going to go up to receive this message from God, which becomes the 10 Commandments. And the Israelites see the presence of God. They see what God is doing. There's your backdrop. There's the context for Exodus chapter 20. This is what verse 1 says as God gives the 10 Commandments for the covenant community. Exodus 20, chapter 1, page 47 says this. "Then God gave the people all these instructions. 'I am the Lord your God who rescued you from the land of Egypt, the place of your slavery. You must not have any other God but me. You must not make for yourself an idol of any kind or an image of anything in the heavens or on the earth or in the sea. You must not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God who will not tolerate your affection for any other gods. I lay the sins of the parents upon their children. The entire family is affected, even children in the third and fourth generations of those who reject me. But I lavish unfailing love for 1,000 generations on those who love me and obey my commands. You must not misuse the name of the Lord your God. The Lord will not let you go unpunished if you misuse his name. Remember to observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. You have 6 days each week for your ordinary work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath day of rest dedicated to the Lord your God. On that day, no one in your household may do any work. This includes you, your sons and daughters, your male and female servants, your livestock, and any foreigners living among you. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and everything in them, but on the seventh day he rested. That is why the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and set it apart as holy. Honor your father and mother. Then you will live a long, full life in the land the Lord your God is giving you. You must not murder. You must not commit adultery. You must not steal. You must not testify falsely against your neighbor. You must not covet your neighbor's house. You must not covet your neighbor's wife, male or female servant, ox or donkey, or anything else that belongs to your neighbor. There they are, the world famous 10 Commandments and kind of the foundation that God gives the Israelites for what would become his law and this narrative in the Bible. And I'm not sure what comes to mind when you think of the 10 Commandments, but historically there's been a lot of emotion around the 10 Commandments. My first memory of the 10 Commandments was actually this, that when I was little, back when people still watched TV with an antenna, where I'm from, there would be this movie that was on every holiday season called The 10 Commandments, had Charlton Heston in it, and I never had the attention span to watch it, but I remember it was on, and I remember my parents, my grandparents, people would watch it. Maybe you saw that movie. Another thing I remember when it comes to the 10 Commandments, I remember going to my grandma's church and going to VBS. There's my grandma's church. It looks like every grandma's church in America. And I remember going there, and when I would go to VBS, we'd be down in the basement in the fellowship hall, I think as they called it. And this picture was on the wall, the 10 Commandments. And it just looked like something that would be in a musty grandma church basement, right? And it was a picture of the 10 Commandments, and I would read those. And I remember there was always controversy around the 10 Commandments. There have been times that people have said we need to remove the 10 Commandments from this public monument, and that would be in the news. There were other times that someone would suggest through a Senate bill that the 10 Commandments should be recited in school, and that would seem to be a controversy. I have friends who told me this week that the 10 Commandments were hanging on the wall in their house. I've met other people who said that when they were growing up, if they would misbehave, their parents would make them write the 10 Commandments out as their punishment. And so I'm not trying to bring up any PTSD you have with the parenting of your parents today, or bring up any legal battles, or say anything bad about my grandma's church. I love that place. But I think that sometimes we've had these impressions made of the 10 Commandments, and we'd have these impressions made of what they are and what they symbolize. And I want to just say today that I hope that maybe you can put those things aside and not make this a political conversation, and not make this a conversation that makes you reflect on some parts of your childhood or anything like that. What I want for our conversation today is I want you to know this, that the 10 Commandments given to Moses there on Mount Sinai serve several key purposes in the larger biblical narrative. And so I want us just to unpack 3 reasons today that we should care about the 10 Commandments, 3 reasons that the 10 Commandments are the foundation of God's law, and how that echoes forward into our lives today. So here's the first one. The 10 Commandments provide a curb for order in the world. They establish a moral and ethical framework for the Israelites, kind of outlining how they should relate to God and relate to one another. And we can overlook that, but that's the foundation of moral law right here that we've been given. These commandments establish a foundational set of moral principles for human behavior and our reverence for God and our respect for others and our personal integrity. And these commandments establish the foundation for culture and society, from societal order and justice, and influences the legal system and ethical standards across cultures. And so those 10 Commandments are a bigger deal than we sometimes want to admit. They give us a foundation for our relationship with others. They guide interpersonal relationships, respect for parents, prohibiting murder and adultery and theft and false witness and coveting and all of those things. In our culture, our hearts, us as humans, we need those things. Now, they do all that because they're more reliable than our instincts or cultural norms. In today's world, many people believe that right and wrong is subjective. And so there are moments that people look at some of these rules and they think like, well, that was good for back then, but that doesn't apply now. And Scripture teaches us that true wisdom begins with the fear of the Lord. And so to understand right and wrong, to have a good life, we have to follow God's ways. We have to be aware of God's law. And the foundation of that is the Ten Commandments. My family has been spending some time the last couple years on vacation in some national parks, or as my kids call it, ruining their lives as I drag them along on vacation. And we've been going to places like Arches National Park and Zion National Park and Rocky Mountain National Park and Yosemite and all these places. And it seems like every park we go into, we end up on like a switchback road that gets really interesting. And there's always a moment where we're driving and we get a little higher, and you kind of look to the right and you think, yeah, that's a really big cliff right there. And suddenly you realize like there's no curb or there's no guardrail. And my kids always do what I like to call the scaring me thing, where they're just like, Dad, look at the view. Or like, Dad, look at that mountain goat. And I'm like, Dad, can't look right now. And I'm kind of like white knuckling the steering wheel and like freaking out because I am aware that if I sneeze wrong, my whole family is going to go tumbling over this 300-foot cliff. And so I always like vent to them or something. You know, I'm like, Dad, can't look right now. And then I'm like, wow, I can't believe there's not a guardrail or there's not something there, because in Ohio we have like a 10-foot drop off and we put a guardrail there. But in these Western states, I don't know if it can't fit their budget or something, but the reason I'm paranoid, the reason I say that, the reason I notice that is because guardrails and curbs keep us where we need to be so that we can be safe, right? And sometimes they're even keeping us safe from ourselves. Maybe we like to think, oh, I don't need that. Oh, that doesn't matter. And yet they're protecting us from ourselves. And the Ten Commandments, God's laws are really doing the same thing. They're a curb, they're a boundary for our lives because we need them. The Ten Commandments also mirror God's law and God's character. And so as the Ten Commandments curb us, what they're really doing is highlighting who God is. What they're really doing is highlighting the importance of living a life that reflects his character. Why does that matter? Well, let's be honest. We don't really like to keep our eyes on God's character. In fact, as I read those 10 commandments, some of you are probably like, oh, I've never killed anyone. I'm doing pretty good, right? This doesn't even apply to me. I'm a really good person. And yet the point of the 10 commandments is not just to say, have you killed someone? Check yes or no, right? That's not what they're about. What they're really doing is pointing us to God's character and drawing us to God's character. And they're showing us God's desire for us to represent his character in our lives. And so God's laws reflect God's heart. God's laws reflect who he wants us to be and what he's like, and they speak of his honor and his worth and his majesty, and they're really telling us this is what matters to God. Because left to ourselves, we look at our lives and we think like, you know what, I'm doing pretty good, I'm doing all right, and these commandments define sin. They define right and wrong. They show us our sin, and they really convince us of a need for a Savior. And ultimately, when we see who God is, when we see what God's character looks like, when we see what sin is, these commandments are pointing us to the fulfillment of the law. See, the 10 commandments are a mirror that we don't always want, but they show every one of us, yes, every one of us, even those who have never murdered someone, they show every one of us that we fall short of God's character and God's standard. And so here's the third thing that you can know about the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments drive us to Jesus Christ. As they curb our lives, as they mirror our lives and reveal our need for God's grace, they show us that no one can perfectly keep these commandments. Even though we like to think it's a check-off system and we're like, did that, doing pretty good at that, I'm pretty good. These commandments are actually a foundation for a relationship with God, because the commandments outline to have a proper relationship with God, how to properly worship God, how to not use his name in vain, how to observe the Sabbath, and ultimately these commandments show us that we can't earn our salvation. that we can't earn God's favor. They give us a guide for how we should live in relationship with God and others. And ultimately, these commandments show us what it looks like to live a life that's set apart. These commandments show us a guide for what it looks like to be God's people and to act different, to look different, to stand out, to live a life that the world around us might not understand, but to be set apart. Here's ultimately how the Ten Commandments drive us to Jesus Christ. Romans 8:1-4 says this, "So now there's no condemnation for those who belong to Christ Jesus. And because you belong to him, the power of the life-giving Spirit has freed you from the power of sin that leads to death. The law of Moses was unable to save us because of the weakness of our sinful nature. So God did what the law could not do. He sent his own son in a body like the body we sinners have, and in that body God declared an end to sin's control over us by giving his son as a sacrifice for our sins. He did this so that the just requirement of the law would be fully satisfied for us, who no longer follow our sinful nature, but instead follow the Spirit." See, the Ten Commandments are the foundation of the law, and the law of the Old Testament was really God just giving us this foundation that would reveal our sin and reveal our need for Jesus. The law's purpose was to reveal our sin and reveal our need for Jesus, and as we're aware of our sin, as we're aware that we can't get it right, as we're aware that we're selfish and we're unfocused and we're walking away from God and walking toward death, Jesus came to fulfill the law. And he got it right in all the ways and all of the places that you and I can't. See, the commandments point forward to Jesus Christ, and he fulfills the law and offers redemption to everyone who believes in him. The Ten Commandments are a curb, the Ten Commandments are a mirror, and the Ten Commandments drive us to Jesus Christ. Here's our big idea for this morning. The Ten Commandments are guidelines for free people to stay free. There's a phrase that we shared a couple of weeks ago that's been said about the Israelites and said about the book of Exodus, and it's this, that you can take the Israelites out of Egypt, but you can't take the Egypt out of the Israelites. See, in this story, we see the Israelites as slaves, but their slavery really goes beyond any geographic area or any specific time that they're mistreated and manipulated. See, they're actually slaves to their own desire to want control and want to be in control. So much so that in an effort to be free, we watch this story and we read this story and we see themselves enslaving themselves to new things. We see them being slaves to their desires and their desire to do what they want, when they want, where they want, how they want, and they make themselves slaves to new things. God frees them and they become slaves to their desires, and God frees them and they become slaves to their selfishness, and God frees them and they want to be in control, and they enslave themselves over and over again to the things that they want. And if we're honest, you and I do the same thing. If we're honest, you and I want to have the same control. And if we're honest, if we're not careful, you and I are enslaved to our desires also. And so I want to share this quote that I shared a couple of weeks ago by C.S. Lewis that says, "Human history is the long, terrible story of man trying to find something other than God which will make him happy." See, what the Israelites in the story of Exodus really show us is that God wants us to look to him, to give up control, and to trust him. And do you know what we don't like to do? We don't like to look to him. We don't like to give up control, and we don't like to trust him. The Ten Commandments are not just something that hangs in the basement of grandma's church. The Ten Commandments are not just something for stuffy old people to hang over someone's head to make them feel bad. The Ten Commandments are instructions on how to get out of Egypt. But the Ten Commandments are also much more than instructions on how to get out of Egypt. They're rules for a free people to stay free. The Ten Commandments aren't prison bars, but they're traffic laws to give us a guide, to give us a curb, to give us a mirror, and to drive us to Jesus. God isn't trying to crush us with red tape and regulations and rules. He's simply pointing out our need for him. God gave us these rules so as free people, we can stay free to distractions and all of these other things, all of these small g gods that we want to make into big G gods, and all of these things that enslave us. The Ten Commandments aren't just for the Old Testament. The Ten Commandments aren't just for a movie that no one watches anymore. The Ten Commandments aren't just for grandma's VBS. The Ten Commandments are relevant for today for us as followers of Jesus. Because Jesus affirmed every one of these commandments in his ministry. Jesus commanded every one of these things as he lived in this world. And while we can't keep the 10 commandments, while we fall short to live up to the 10 commandments, while we fall short to live out the greatest commandment, to love God with all of ourselves and to love our neighbor as ourselves, we can see what the purpose of the 10 commandments is. They continue to show us our sin and point us to our need for Jesus on the cross. Rules and boundaries and regulations and commandments don't strip our freedom, but instead they provide it because they point us to the place that we can have true freedom. 1 John 5:3 tells us that God's laws are not burdensome. And yet some of us, in our desire to do what we want to do, how we want to do it, when we do it, we look at rules like this and we think feels like a burden to me. And that's where we need to renew our minds and change our thinking. Because John 10:10 tells us that Jesus wants to give us an abundant life. John 8:32 tells us that he wants us to know freedom. And so we have to trust and know that God didn't give us boundaries so he could control us. God didn't give us these guardrails and these rules and the law because he wanted us to be stuck behind these things. He didn't give us the 10 commandments so we could check off the boxes and earn our salvation and be like, yay, I'm finally good enough. I think I can get into heaven now. But that's how people see Christianity. That's how people see God's law and God's rules and God's intent. They see it as this thing that boxes them in, and it's a way that they think they're supposed to be good enough so they can just earn their salvation and earn God's love. And you cannot earn God's love because he already loved you. No matter what you did, no matter how you fall short, no matter how you let down the law, no matter how this backfires on you, you can't make God love you anymore because he loved you enough to send his son, Jesus. And the message of the Exodus story is this, that the Israelites were oppressed. They were enslaved first to Egypt and then to their own desires and the things they were pursuing. And God showed up and he rescued them in love. And he called them to walk with him and to freedom as they walked with him. And after this moment, he gave them a new way to live. And we see the same thing in the work of Jesus. We're enslaved to our own desires and the things that we want and the things that we pursue, and we're lost in our sin. And Jesus shows up on the scene and he rescues us. And he calls us to obedience. He calls us to live for him, not to earn his love, not to earn our salvation, but because he's made us into new people, his children. And he calls us to obedience. And obedience is a response to salvation, not a way to earn it. When we understand what God has done for us, when we understand what Jesus has done to rescue us, we should delight in his law and live to honor him and live to follow his spirit and live to be a new people and live to be his children. Loving Jesus, understanding what he's done for us, means following his commands. It means being obedient to him. That's why the 10 Commandments are guidelines for free people to stay free. They're not taking away our control. They're not boxing us in. They're saying, this is what it looks like to have freedom in Christ. This is what it looks like to not be enslaved to your own desires. This is what it looks like to not run after the things that you think are going to be great and are going to end up tearing your life and tearing your soul apart. This is what it looks like to be free, and freedom is found in Jesus. So the 10 Commandments and God's rules and God's way of living and the things that he asks for from us are a curb. They're not a curb because he wants to control us. They're a curb so that we don't drive over the cliff. They're a curb to help us stay free and help us live life for him and avoid death. God's boundaries serve as a mirror because there's going to be moments that we think we're doing everything right and we lie to ourselves. And sometimes we have to look at his law and look at his character and say, okay, I need to change that. God's commands, the 10 Commandments, drive us to Jesus because we see the ways that we fall short. We see the ways that we need a Savior. And we see the ways that we can cry out to him and say, Jesus, I need you. And so the question I want to ask this morning is, where's your hope? Where's your hope at? If your hope is in you, and your hope is in you being good enough and doing all of the right things, I hope you can make it to lunch without falling short. I hope you can make it to lunch without messing up and not reflecting God's character. I sometimes fear how this stage up here looks and that people think like, oh, that Mark guy must have something together. I do not. I do not have anything together. And if you were to follow me throughout the course of a week, I think it would probably take like an hour till you'd be like, he messed up twice this hour, messed up 9 times this hour. Man, that guy's really a jerk. What's wrong with him? There are so many ways that we don't reflect God's character and we fall short. And what the law is showing us is that we need Jesus because he came and fulfilled the law and was a perfect sacrifice. So when he died on the cross, I don't have to be perfect anymore because I never could be. So I'm not trusting that Mark is smart. I'm not trusting that Mark is wise or that Mark is well-behaved or that Mark is respectful or that Mark's in control or Mark's good enough, because Mark is not. I'm glad my family's not here. They'd probably yell, amen, or something like that, right? But they can tell you that I'm not good enough. But I'm trusting that Jesus is. And I'm trusting that his law and his guidelines are a curb and a mirror, and they point me to him. So if I could tell you one thing today to remember from the Exodus story, I would just want to say that I hope the 10 Commandments drive you to Jesus and drive you to depend on Jesus and remember what he's done for you and trust in what he's done for you. And if you've never taken a moment to say, Jesus, I've seen what you've done for my life and I want to walk with you. I want to build my life on you. I want to trust you. We would love to talk to you about that after our service today. There's a prayer table right back here. We would love to talk with you about what it means to trust Jesus, to depend on Jesus, to walk with him and have a relationship with him. The 10 Commandments are God's guidelines for free people to stay free because he wants us to have freedom in him and he wants us to know him. Let me pray. God, thanks for the narrative of the Bible. Thanks for what we see in the Israelites. And Lord, thank you for moments where we can see ourselves in the Israelites. Lord, all the ways that we forget you and don't trust you and want to be in control. God, thank you that we see that you're guiding us. You're helping us stay free, helping us stay safe, and helping us know you and see our need for you. And Lord, you're helping us have ultimate freedom through relationship with you. God, I pray if there's someone in the room this morning that has never trusted you, has never found freedom in you, Lord, I pray that they'll see that apart from all the other things they've run after. Pray that they'll see you and want to know you and want to know freedom in you. God, thanks for this morning. Thanks for a chance to be focused on your word. And Lord, thank you for the ways that you offer us freedom and help us stay free from the things that pursue us, the things that own us, and the things that keep us captive and enslaved. It's in the name of Jesus I pray. Amen.